Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Communities, Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care, and they're now accepting residents. So if you'd like to jot down their number, give it a call at 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. They are accepting residents. And I'd also like to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and are grateful for their hospitality. And I'd also like to welcome David Harrison for a monthly check-in to see, what the heck's going to happen. My nails are bitten down to the quick. I never thought a midterm election would be so consequential. But here we are. Hi, David.
It was pretty monumental in 2018. As you know, we took back the Senate with Donald Trump's help. So that was a good time. Or is that when that happened? Anyway, we did well in 2018. So welcome. I was noting to read that our follow-up clicks are holding up nicely. So a lot of your colleagues are watching us talk after the fact, and that creates a special problem this time because I'm going to give you at the end my predictions on what's going to happen on Tuesday, and which means somebody could watch this on tape after the election and confront me in the town and country and tell me the errors I made. And Mr. Kilbane is not above doing exactly that.
I can't wait, buddy.
So famously, I thought in 2016, I didn't anticipate what Comey would do, what Hillary would have won. Hillary did win, but at any rate, we're all predictors, and at the end, I'll say what I think. We have three segments today. First, I'm going to talk about the glimmers, people who are afraid that it's trending toward Republicans have some things that they're clinging to, and I'll tell you what those things are. There's quite a bit of writing now on that, and it's interesting and a little bit heartening, though not heartening enough so that you could sleep 8 hours a night or anything like that. Secondly, I want to spend some time in what, if anything, Democrats did wrong leading up to this election. And I want to spend a little time on that because we tend to be so focused on a fairly crazed opposition, at least the MAGA part of the opposition, that sometimes we forget that what we do matters and what we fail to do, mistakes we made. And so it wouldn't be such a bad idea to revisit that. And then thirdly, I'll say what I think is going to happen on Tuesday. So first, the glimmers, and I'll stop and see if anybody has any others or disputes any that I will present. First, the narrative right now is that we'll lose 15 or so seats in the House, and that the Senate is a toss-up. But as you know, 60% or so of us have not voted. So the narrative could be inaccurate, wildly or slightly. There's an excellent site about early voting, but first I want to talk about poll averaging. So a lot of us watch, and I mentioned it on this call before, a lot of us watch the generic congressional vote. That's a simple question. Are you going to vote for the Democrat or Republican for the House? And the reason they ask that is every one of those seats is up, so they figure that's a great way to show D or R strength. And it's been a fairly decent predictor of years that we would take back some seats, keeping in mind that this is an off-year election where we have the presidency. So classically, we're not supposed to take back seats at all. And in 2010, famously, after we passed the Affordable Care Act, we lost 62 House seats. That was a debacle. So the first thing to think about is whether the generic poll averages that show us slipping by maybe 4 points in the last 6 weeks are related, as the press narrative goes, to continued levels of inflation, or whether it's possible, and some have contended this, that they're being driven mostly by Republican polling, and that it's intentional, that there were 8 or so Republican affiliated firms who came out with this trend a couple weeks ago. They weren't the only ones. For instance, NBC News poll was not so great anyway, but there's a site now that's called Split Ticket Aggregator that only does generic poll, congressional generic poll averages based upon nonpartisan pollsters, and that generic poll is even and not -2, -3. So that's interesting. I mean, that's pretty compelling, actually. However, it turns out we would want to do better than even to keep from losing the House. We'd want to do +2 or so. The other thing to remember about poll and poll averages is if you were to take 100 shots with a basketball from different lengths of distances from the hoop, the closer you got to the hoop, the more shots you would make. And if you did an average of that, you could find that you made 58% of your shots. But that's all the average tells you, because you have all sorts of different distances. Poll averages are problematic because there is no greater chance than that the average will turn out than an outlier. You see what I'm saying? They all have margins of error. So the fact that you've got, 10 polls at -2% and 1 poll at 0% doesn't actually, it's an uneven predictor, because you're all using proper polling methods. And so there's no reason why 2 people coming up, if you all used reasonable methods that are subjected to the scrutiny of poll researchers, then 2 polls at 2% are not necessarily more reliable than 1 poll at 0%. I took a long time to say that. I'm saying beware of poll averages. They're deceiving. They're not based upon the same kind of performance limitations that shooting a basketball would be. What are the other glimmers, you say, David Harrison? Tell me other glimmers. One, of course, is more famously, Donald Trump is about to make it all about himself again. He was just in Iowa saying that the news is all over that he's thinking of announcing his run for the presidency on November 14th. This is all about a wounded ego who's way past his expiration date in American politics. And he wants perhaps to announce before he gets indicted. Either way, luckily, he's announced his travel schedule, and famously, he's going to Florida, which is okay, but beautifully and wonderfully to the advantage of Tim Ryan and John Fetterman, he's going to Ohio and Pennsylvania. So right before the election, with independent votes in the balance, he's going to insert his own self. And the nice thing about that is most independents, when polled, are tired of his story. They just are. We, as I said once on this call, we could take up a collection and send them to both places, and it would be great. Obama's going several places too. Joe Biden's going to Pennsylvania. So I think the glimmer here is the last minute appearances are in our favor because there's nobody who could travel for the Republicans. Nobody who could travel for Republicans that would help them with independence. So there you have it. So that would be a second glimmer. Other glimmers, early voting is high, and compared to 2018 levels, but it depends on the state. So the real good news is early voting is high in Pennsylvania, which has instituted no excuse absentee balloting. It's particularly high in Georgia, and especially with new African American voters. And it's quite going along quite nicely in Arizona. So the more people that vote, the better off we are. In all three of those states, they have calculations as to what percentage they think are Democrats so far. So that's good news, at least in those three states. And as you know, it's happened in Florida 2 years ago. The day of the election, voting can catch up to an early voting advantage. And then, of course, as you know, in 2020, then late counted. Depends on when the state starts counting its absentee ballots, but if it spreads out over 3 days, as happened in Pennsylvania, we knew all along we were going to win Pennsylvania because of who was casting absentee ballots. So anyway, the glimmer there is early voting is high in states that really matter to us, including defending Warnock and Mark Kelly, and the possibility that Fetterman will win. Now we have another glimmer, and that is democracy being on the ballot might be a resonant issue. As candidates were always talking about that, but you see in the last week a picking up of Democrats talking about election denialism, election result denialism. That's a strategy. That's intentional. There's no accident here. And it's no accident that Joe Biden made a big speech at Union Station on it, which I thought was eloquent. What's happening here is two things. First, they think that they've got all the choice juice that they can get. That is, they think they all long thought from Kansas on that it would be powerful. It has been. In fact, in the absence of inflation, we'd be talking about how many seats we'd be picking up, but we're not. So they figure they need an issue besides choice as a central issue. And Paul Pelosi getting hit with a hammer, an awful thing with a fractured skull, has helped give them that issue. You notice mainstream Republicans are silent on it, except to say it's taking our attention away from inflation. And MAGA Republicans have stopped saying smart-ass things about it because they're been told by their campaign operatives that that's not helpful. So they're trying to make it not an issue, but we might get a couple percent boost from that. Another positive jobs report this morning, 260,000 jobs. And then last is the weakness of certain Republican Senate candidates, which Mitch, to his, he got a little loose lipped and talked about that. And that certainly would be true of Masters in Arizona, where they probably had a chance against Mark Kelly. Bolduc in New Hampshire, the moderate Republican would have had a great chance against Maggie Hassan. Herschel Walker, I don't know. I mean, his numbers are holding up. So it just shows what being a running back can do when you're running for Senate. And definitely the governor of Pennsylvania might help pull down Oz, Dr. Oz. So that's good that we have some bad candidates on the other side. So that's my sum total of glimmers. What do you think? Are you feeling glimmered this morning? Does that make us all feel better, or do you think it's not a sufficient list?
It's not enough.
No. Did I say anything you didn't already know?
Yeah, you said a few things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Questions and thoughts about the glimmers?
And remember, if you're too shy to speak up, you can always put questions in the chat also.
So of my favorite glimmers, I really think Trump is a growing liability. Remember, not forgetting the core that J.D. Vance, everybody, they're now fighting for, in their primaries, they fight it to see who could grasp the hem of Trump's garment. But now they're fighting for the middle, and it does not help to have Trump wandering around with his bizarre show.
Where are you at with Vance?
Well, I think I'm going to go over each of those, but I think if you made me bet the House, I'd bet that Vance will beat Ryan, but I don't think it's anywhere near a certainty. Before we go on to that exact question, who we think is going to beat who, are there any other thoughts about glimmers? Anything that I didn't say that you take heart in?
I need more, David. I need more.
You need more. Yeah. Well, there is some thought that in some states, here I'll give you two more. One is, especially immediately post-Roe, women were registering new registrants in a much greater rate than men. And there's some early voting in some states that shows that the young people's vote is picking up.
Oh, please, please.
So we need both those things. On my other blog adventures, we put some recent money into two projects having to do with Latino vote. When you listen to the news about the Latino vote, they have it all wrong. We absolutely got killed in South Florida by Cuban Americans who classically are not with us. But every Latino vote we can get in Arizona and Nevada runs 70-30 in our direction. So my blog raised a lot of almost $20,000 to do internet advertising in Arizona in Spanish language, and now to do radio, another $10,000 to do radio ads in Nevada. So I'm making a big bet on Mi Familia Vota, which and the margins in Nevada are going to be tiny. So in terms of us winning the presidency in 2 years ago, the Latino vote in both of those states was absolutely indispensable.
Yeah.
Let's go on before I run us out of time, unless anybody has anything to say about glimmers.
Oh, what do you think about Charlie Crist? Do you think there's any way him getting?
No, I don't think so. I wish he would have let the woman who's agricultural commissioner do the campaign, because then we could say freshness. But no, I don't. I think Charlie Crist shouldn't have given up his congressional seat. Val Demings is a great candidate, but she's running against Rubio, who's well established. I think this is going to be tough. I think those numbers, I don't have any reason to disbelieve those numbers.
Yeah.
So going back 2 years, we went into having the presidency with huge unmet demand. There had been 4 years of Donald Trump trying to take apart the federal government. And the wish list, not just of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but the wish list for your garden variety liberal Democratic senator, that doesn't mean Joe Manchin. The wish list was huge. Another thing was a factor, and that is if you know you have to negotiate on infrastructure with Senate Republicans, who you're not going to be filibustered to death. You can't include it in the reconciliation bill. You need 10 of the votes. Then you, as a part of the negotiation, you start with a high number because you know you're going to have to settle with a lower number. Unfortunately, that gave you a mess of headlines. Joe Biden, introduces $2.5 trillion proposal, and then you get a headline. Bernie Sanders says that's way too little. Let's spend $4 trillion. So at the time that was happening, of course, America was falling apart, and the payroll protection plan itself saved innumerable businesses and jobs. So you notice that isn't part of the campaign now because of inflation. So they don't want to have a campaign that says, we spent most of that money really on great things, because the argument is that we put too much money out there and generated inflation. So there, excuse me for a minute, 2-minute pause. I've got to answer the door.
Okay. That's interesting. We look at it as being a successful, more money in the economy, but if it's coming from the bottom up, it's bad because it causes inflation. So I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts on that idea?
Well, when I was seeing the jobs numbers being spun immediately as bad news, people are able to find work. That's a bad story.
It's insanity. It's insane world to me. But apparently it really has a lot to do with, the income of investors in the stock market. I mean, it really comes down to that. That's more important than getting it from bottom up to the top down attitude. So I don't know. Anybody else have any ideas on that?
One thing I would say, and I think David would agree, he's run for office, and I've run for office in Ohio 3 times, and for commissioner and state rep. And I found, you do a lot of door to door, and I found being out talking to average voters, they're a whole lot sharper and smarter and better informed than we being the media tend to give them credit. And I think the issues that are on the ballot now, I think people understand that. I think they understand the seriousness. That we're talking about democracy. Are we going to keep it or are we going to lose it? That's a pretty serious issue. And I think that voters will understand that. And I expect to see, results in favor of Democrats.
Which means basically, I mentioned that as a possible glimmer, and what Tom's saying is that I could have given a greater emphasis. So I raised the possibility that Biden's speech would resonate and people would be horrified by the attack on Paul Pelosi. It's just a question of how much. And back to the inflation issue, every time you fill up at the pump, you know about it. And I'm saying the unforced error by Democrats was where it was heading with the huge numbers is they were betting, and Janet Yellen and others told them so, that it would not generate runaway inflation. And a couple things happened: war in Ukraine, supply chain breaks. But generally, this equation has to do with there's a lot of money in the economy. As people stop wearing masks and get out there, is the supply of workers going to match up with the demand for products that those workers produce? And guess what? There were glitches in production. Companies had scaled back, and the demand came quickly. The supply of labor came more slowly. Thus, too much money was chasing too few products. Lauren Summers, former Treasury Secretary, said that in advance, and Democrats did not want it to believe it did not want it to be true. They wanted to not talk about that, and that's an unforced error. Even given that we were going to put a ton of money out there, so then because you don't anticipate and then you're in a situation where you got to rely on the Fed to lock down inflation, and it's brutal. So that's all too bad. The thing it's masking is we could have had an uncommon off-year election where usually the party in power loses seats. If we didn't have inflation, we'd be talking about picking up 20 seats. So I think it's too bad. I agree with Tom that democracy on the ballot could turn out very nicely for us. I think everybody knows who's on the side of democracy being protected. I worry a little bit about us being silent on crime. I don't know what we're going to say, but I feel worried a little bit about that. But the primary error by Democrats has to do with economic management, and there's just, it's something that people know about. People as informed as they are, the thing they know most about what's being campaigned about is how much they pay for gas. Are there questions about the errors of Democrats or comments on this matter?
I have one. I think that, we're talking about inflation, but inflation is also caused by record profits by corporations, large multinational corporations. I mean, Shell came out and said, yeah, we've made more profits than we ever have before. That doesn't necessarily mean that the people that are working or whatever, it's called their stockholders and their boards of directors. And so are the ones that are making the money. And I don't think the Democrats did a good job of getting that message out, that's a cause of inflation also.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. That is, the gas price doesn't, if you had the normal taking by capitalists of profits in sort of, in a normal economic year, the price of gas would be lower by 50 cents a gallon. So that's pretty compelling, except in the not defense of Biden's economic advisors. They knew that at the outset. I mean, it's true that companies are to blame, but they knew what the laws of the United States were. And last I checked, we don't have a windfall profits tax, which is very hard to define. So it's true, absolutely. And it's a good political thing to say, which, as you say, has been underemphasized, but it doesn't excuse this party from. I'm just saying there was a little chin leak there.
Yeah,
I think they made a decision that liberals and progressives could get along if they pursued. Biden's legislative record in the last 2 years is extraordinary. They made a decision to go for the cynical. It's not cynical. It's never waste a good pandemic. If you're going to come out of a pandemic and you just can't come into office, then do the things that you think you need to do to help America big time. And if that means you get 80% of your legislative accomplishments in 2 years and 20% in the other 2 years, that's just the way it is. Take that risk, because you usually lose during the off years anyway, and get as much you can through cinema and Joe Manchin and reconciliation as you can get, and then take your lumps if there are lumps to be taken. I just wish that we had done a little bit better on lumps so that there would be fewer to be absorbed. We have a question about the Wisconsin race, so I'm going to go to races and predictions unless anybody has anything more to say about where we stand.
So, hi, Ellen Lockhart here. I just wanted to jump in and say I've been appalled by the lack of media coverage about the real causes of inflation and the fact that it's not the responsibility of the president. You don't see one hysterical media report about inflation that talks about the record profits in various sectors. and the actual causes of inflation. It's just hysteria about inflation, and no explanation whatsoever. I mean, from the New York Times on down.
I
What's
agree.
with that?
I think if we're looking to the media to make us fully understand, they're not doing it. In fact, if anything, well, certainly they're monumentally overstating the role a president has in
Mhm.
these issues, and within a capitalist system where there's no legislative way to regulate corporate profits. I, however, would still hold out for my criticism of the party to which I have allegiance. I think you know those things ahead of time when you're Secretary of the Treasury. So those conditions that you described are known in advance. So I'm not arguing the president has monumental power. I'm suggesting that they weren't as worried as they should have been, and that they didn't use their modest powers as well as they could have. That's
Inflation is global. It's a global problem, the inflation. It's not just the United States.
Well, if you're running for office
I
and you know in advance that you're going to get blamed,
Yeah,
then you say, what's in my toolkit? And
okay.
I'm arguing that they were too surprised and too convinced by Janet Yellen and others that it wasn't going to happen. I don't disagree with the lack of knowledge, the poor performance of the press, the overstatement of what the president can do. I'm saying within his limited powers, it's back to what I said. We knew we had power for 2 years. We could do 3 reconciliation bills. We could get Republicans to sign on to infrastructure. That's as big of a legislative agenda as we've had. It dwarfs even the year we got Obamacare. It's the biggest set of legislative accomplishments since the New Deal. And we went for that prize.
Mhm.
I'm saying that we could have protected our flank a little bit better, I think.
Okay.
On to predictions. First, I want to say, I think we're going to win the Senate, which will be nice. If we didn't, which isn't going to happen, I don't think. Remember, having the presidency keeps the worst things from happening. So there's hardly anything Congress can do without the president except be enormously annoying and set us up for the next presidential election. That is, McConnell will figure out how to manage his caucus. He's got the votes and he doesn't want to close down government. If Kevin McCarthy has a 10-vote margin in the House, they will, that's what the expression is, whip. They will whip those Republicans. And there aren't that many moderates left, maybe 20 or so, 25. He'll whip them. And there will be a Republican caucus effort to close down the government a couple of times. The good news about that, bad news is it's not good for the economy. And of course, then they'll stop trying to close it down because the market will go down 2,000 points. But it's not bad for us politically over time. It's just awful for the government. McCarthy's going to have an awful time with that caucus. It's got so many denialists, and I mean, it's just awful. So it'd be nice to have the Senate, and I think we will. Before the next session, they'll clean up some things. They'll come back in session, and some of you follow the Electoral Reform Act to reemphasize that the Pence didn't have the powers that Trump thought he did on January 6th. And they'll pass that before the new Congress. I think I said last month it'd be Senate plus 2 Democrats. I think it's going to be plus 1. This is what I think. I think where we need to defend, Warnock in Georgia, Kelly in Arizona, Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire, will all defend. Though Warnock may not get his 50%, so that might be on to December 6th. That leaves us with only one incumbent. You know, all these things like Sherry Beasley and Ryan. Those are all seats we're trying to win. We have one incumbent. I think we only have one incumbent who's truly imperiled, and that's Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada. We won that very narrowly last time and very narrowly 2 years ago. So if she wins, I think then we might get to +2. So what I'm saying, if she loses, we'll win 2 of the others and be +1. That's my view. So what that means to me is we need, if she loses, to be +1, we would need 2 out of the following. Mandela Barnes beating the totally, absolutely mean-spirited Ron Johnson, who does not belong in American politics. What an evil, relentlessly evil human being. He makes J.D. Vance look like one of the 12 apostles. It's just awful. Tim Ryan, a real shot in Ohio because he's winning back basically the working class Democrats that Tom knows and loves. And remember, there's a pattern to that. The other U.S. senator from Ohio is a Democrat and is senator for exactly those reasons. Sherry Beasley has a decent chance at Ted Budd. She's voting. She's polling even among all voters, but it's an issue of an enthusiasm gap in North Carolina. And John Fetterman is still, I think, going to win. Oprah just endorsed John Fetterman, so how can we? Oprah started Mehmet Oz's career by having him on Oprah, and so it's nice to see her do that. And Obama's going to Pennsylvania. I think we'll pull that out. I think Val Demings, Admiral Franken, and Iowa don't have a chance. I am a little worried. The question from Mr. Golden was about Mandela Barnes. I'm thinking that of those 4, Barnes, Ryan, Beasley, and Fetterman, it's probably an order of likelihood: Fetterman, Ryan, Beasley, Barnes, if Barnes is 3 or 4 points behind. But it's so hard to tell. If we lose Mastro, we need 2 of those to be +1. If we want to be tied again with Kamala Harris breaking the tie, then we just need 1 of those 4, because I don't think we're going to lose anything else we're defending. I don't think we're going to lose Warnock or Kelly or Hassan. So it gives us a lot of chances to go +2 or +1. And remember, if we lose the House, Manchin doesn't have the same oversized role, because we can't pass reconciliation votes that get 50 votes plus Kamala anyway. It still matters. 51 is better than 50 in terms of decreasing the very significant extra powers that Sinema and Manchin have. So that'd be a reason to do it by itself. But of course, the biggest reason is having the majority gives you're running the committees, you're driving the agenda. What else will happen? I think the inflation deal, as unjust as it may be, is too powerful for us to overcome. So I'm going with a belief that that's going to be Republicans +14. The bad thing, of course, is in the olden days when there were 40, 50 moderate. Back when I worked in DC, there were 50 moderate Republicans in the House. So it was, if you held it, the Democrats held a 10-seat majority, that would be a workable thing. It's a little harder now, where they execute their moderates. In the House, I think, as you know, you can tell, I think Patty's fine. What's interesting for me is why they spent all that money to beat the hell out of Patty if they didn't have a chance to win, which they don't because of Roe. It's interesting because I think the reason it's narrower is that 30 years of service is being held against Patty. But I think Roe, she'll win by 8 points, and she's fine. I also think Kim Schreier would be fine. I think she did a brilliant thing by getting positive ads out early and defining herself as working with the Wenatchee sheriff and this and that. And I think we're helped yet again because it's Matt Larkin. I think Reagan Dunn, who lost in the primary, principally because he had alcohol problems, would have been a better candidate for them because he's got some sort of moderate things that he's done, defining moderate in the present use of the term. So at any rate, I think Schreier's helped because Larkin's associated with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think we've got a great.
Talk about evil.
Yeah. The only other thing I would say is some of you follow Marie Glusenkamp Perez. I don't know what to say. It all has to do with the extent to which the followers of Jamie Herrera Butler cannot accept her opponent. There isn't any decent polling. She's raised a ton of money, including from some of us, so we'll just see. So that thus endeth my predictions, minus 15 in the House, some decent governorship wins, +1 or +2 in the Senate. I would say in the Senate, this is another big advantage in terms of Fetterman being our great hope. And that is that governor's race is awful for the Republicans. Mastriano's down to Shapiro by 10 points or so. So that really helps somebody like Fetterman to be running in concert with a governor who's 10-point, gubernatorial candidate who's 10 points ahead. I don't know what's happening in Wisconsin, but Noah Barnes is an outstanding candidate. I guess it's a little bit like 2018, Hillary in 2016, where there's a reason why Obama goes to Milwaukee. We got to perform in those precincts. We got to get people there. And so I guess turnout is absolutely the story in Wisconsin.
Well, the thing with Wisconsin, David, as far as 2016 goes, is Hillary never went there.
Yeah, that was Robbie Mook is no longer a genius. What an awful.
I mean, that's why she lost the state. I mean, you talk to anybody from Wisconsin, they'll tell you that. Any Democrat from Wisconsin. I mean, she didn't care about it, so for heck with her.
Well, I think she did care about it. I think they told her, "You're a candidate. You're going to a million places," and they told her there was a firewall. Turns out that started a painful episode in our history. Even with that, if it hadn't been for the Russians and Comey, Hillary would have been president. We'd have 3 more or 2 more Supreme Court justices, and a lot of misery has befallen us over that day. But I would say that in the 6 years since, we have acquitted ourselves quite well. Last I checked, we own the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and we have done some marvelous things. I agree that America's in trouble, that democracy is at risk, but I have a lot of faith in America. I don't think the druggist from Des Moines or the insurance salesman from Tuscaloosa is headed toward collective insurrection. I think people want to fix America, and I think eventually Trump will pass from the scene. I think it's been an awful time, but I do take great heart in how extensive the opposition has been in all 3 of those elections. All 2, 18 and 20, have been good. And even if we lose the House, it will be way fewer lost seats than one would have guessed in an off-year election. This does underscore the problem with doing away with the filibuster. If we had 57 senators, then there would be less risk. When you have 50 senators, you don't do away with a rule that gives 49 of them. If we get to 49, it takes away their power to block legislation. It's too risky. Comments on my predictions? You have different predictions?
No.
Sherry Beasley was elected statewide in South Carolina. That's another turnout election. I'm surprised Val Demings hasn't taken hold. I think Beto's not going to win. I
You don't
think,
oh, man, too
no,
bad.
I don't see the, I know we're supposed to disbelieve polls, but I don't see that.
Who is that?
Beto O'Rourke.
Beto O'Rourke. I also don't think Stacey Abrams is going to win. I think very perversely, if Kemp beats Stacey Abrams, the good news is the African-American registrations have moved along very nicely. So, and early voting is excellent. So if we win Warnock and maybe Stacey Abrams, that'll be why, plus Herschel Walker's weaknesses. But perversely, Kemp is running ahead of Herschel Walker because he stood up to Trump. So that gives him some independent voters that he otherwise wouldn't get. Yet he stood up for him in such a way. Well, basically, he's got a MAGA base that's not going to vote for Stacey Abrams.
No. Anybody
Other
else?
predictions. What do you think, Kilbane? Am I on point?
Yeah, I think you're right on. I'm really questioning why Stacey Abrams doesn't do better. I mean, seems to me to be an ideal candidate. She's the reason they won down there with, getting everybody registered. And why she doesn't do better is, I just don't understand it.
Well, I think if she was running against the Kemp of 4 years ago with the Stacey Abrams of today, that she would win, and she almost won. And I think now that Kemp's established himself as governor, he's just harder to beat as an incumbent and an incumbent who showed a little bit of spine when Trump was illegally calling his Secretary of State. And we called Kemp too. So I think that's why it's too bad, because it's not great to have lost twice for the same race. Stacey Abrams will be around for a long time, but it's too bad because she'd be a great governor.
Sure.
Yep.
And she might win. I mean, those things I mentioned might work, but
Oh, what is it? Go ahead.
I think the main reason is because she's Black and she's a woman.
well,
Be honest with you.
going back to what I was saying about Kemp pissed off MAGA Republicans, of which there are many in Georgia. And then I said, but they're not going anywhere. They're not going to vote for Stacey Abrams. And then Sheila just finished the sentence, not incidentally, because she's Black and a woman. And I think probably more of the former than the latter, but certainly both. And so it absolutely has that shade of it for sure.
Right.
I would like to know where they pulled Patty Murray's opponent. I'm not even going to mention her name because she makes me sick to watch her. To be honest with you, where did they pull her from?
Well, she was quite active in Veterans Affairs through Patty. So I think from there, in a different age, maybe they would have put her up as a little bit less of a viper. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, she made the crack about how Patty is no longer a mom in tennis shoes, and of course, Patty looked down at her feet and she was wearing tennis shoes.
No, I've known Patty for ever, and she's really a fine person. She's not only a great senator, she's an outstanding human being. So she's going to win. It's just been painful to. It's just one more advertisement one more reason to not turn on the TV to listen to that.
Exactly.
Well, I watched the debate between the two of them, and it was perfectly obvious that Ms. S was not going to answer any of the questions anyway. And all she could do is smile, which again, she's so fake. I'm sorry. I just have no use for this.
Well, I talked to somebody not quite as partisan as you, Sheila, who thought that who thought that she came off pretty well, that she stuck to the kind of positive message and indicated it's time for a change, and that was kind of persuasive to this person who is not a big political thinker, or not involved in this kind of deep watching of candidates. They just tuned in to see who they were going to vote for.
I think that's basically what has happened. I didn't watch the debate, but I think Patty probably started out 16 or 18 points ahead and narrowed through Tiffany Smiley being presentable and not there for 30 years. So in that, I think in Washington, which is a blue state with Roe v. Wade, Tiffany Smiley's not going to win. And notice all those polls have Patty over 50%, which if you're running for office, you love the poll over 50% with very few undecided, with however many undecided, so Patty will win.
What do we do about a person like Ron Johnson? I mean, I have friends out.
Defeat him.
You defeat him, I know that. But the thing is, my friend who's county commissioner out there is saying that it's up for grabs, really.
I think the interesting thing that we all need to ponder is we're all sitting here and we think a certain wing, large wing of the Republican Party is unthinkable, unexplainable. And I think a lot of that wing, everything we could say reinforces the opinion they already have. So I think the Trump's support has deteriorated every year since 2016, but the reason it's still amazingly large relative to the sensibilities we have if we believe in our country. The reason it's so large is every time he says something ridiculous and we criticize, it reinforces their view that he's a truth teller when he's the biggest liar ever in American politics. So go figure about that. I think MAGA reinforces itself every day of the year. You're bought into a certain thing. You can see those people at rallies. They're unshakable. And I listened to an NPR to a woman who had been a poll worker, and she thought her local polls were impeccable, but she had bought into, well, in the cities, it's probably not that way. So I think it's a reinforcing thing. I think for all people think that DeSantis is evil and he's not an attractive elected official to me. He does believe that there is a constitution. So there's a step away from Trump. I really think that there's no way that Joe Biden is running. I think he's just saying that he intends to run to hold down the fort. He's not going to run for president at 82. He's not going to do that. And we got to start searching for a candidate after next Tuesday. And both Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar have Senate races 2 years from now, so that complicates their candidacy. It's certainly going to be a generation change. And on the Republican side, watch Nikki Haley. It's not necessarily Ron DeSantis. And Nikki Haley could come in one scooch toward the center of DeSantis. The issue is if Trump runs, who will be in early. And the problem is Republican primaries are winner take all primaries. So Trump won any number of all the delegates with getting 30% of the votes because nobody would drop out. Remember, Kasich was in and so forth. So that Democrats do it proportionally, and Republicans don't, and that's why Trump got the nomination in the first place, and they're doing it that way again. So if Trump runs, it'll be interesting because they'll wait too long to get to a stop Trump movement. But I don't think Trump is going to stay in the race because I think he's going to be indicted both by Merrick Garland and by Florida. I mean, Georgia.
Get it going here. Come on, get it done.
Yeah, the celebration day. Why are you celebrating in the streets, Karen King? Is it a holiday? I didn't know.
Oh, Lordy. So we don't have much time left. Did
I
we
think
get
we're
to our
done.
third?
Any final questions? So we'll see, won't we?
Yeah.
Knock on wood. Hope that what Gilbane was saying is pronounced. Hope that that argument over Paul Pelosi, not just Paul Pelosi, but deniers, takes hold with independents. That would be the best thing that could happen between now and Tuesday.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, David.
Good to see you.
David.
Thank you.
See you in December.
Hey.
All right.